Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise podcast. I'm really pleased to have Christina Baltais with us this episode. Christina's an artist who lives with ME and she's in Canada. That's right, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Her artwork can be found on wordsandmedicine.com. Her most recent work is called Invisible Exertions, and that's for Invisible Disabilities Week. And yeah, it'd be just great to hear a little bit about your story, Christina. Do you want to tell us about your sort of chronic illness journey and how was life before you became ill, and how did you adjust to life with ME?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a lot, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's okay. So I'm here. So I got sick a long time ago, back in 2005. So 18 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, honestly feels like I'm talking about a different person, like, because it was so long ago. But at that time, I was super, super healthy. I was really athletic. I worked out every day. I mountain biked. I was also studying nutrition and nutraceutical sciences at the University of Guelph. I was full time. Also, like in the summers, I would spend working in different provincial parks in Ontario, cleaning up the trails, like backpacking trails, and would actually do out trips and just really physical manual labor. And I just loved it. I never really experienced that much illness at all. I was like really, really fortunate that I was super healthy up until what I believe to have been, I think I had an exposure to the Epstein-Barr virus,
Mm.
and everything just kind of slowly unraveled. The strange thing about my exposure was I was dating someone at the time who had mono, and at that time I had
Mm.
no symptoms of mono. Like I didn't develop mono, but I was with that person. And interesting enough, 2 months later, I started getting really, really severe vertigo, and it just never went away. And within a year, I had full blown ME, and it changed my entire world. Um, everything. It was almost as if I went to bed one night and the next day I woke up in a completely different body, a completely different reality. Anything I knew about my body was no longer true. Um, I could no longer be, I had to take a semester off school. I moved back with my parents and just rested. And I kept, which is really common for a lot of athletes or people who love exercising, is you are keep thinking like, oh, I'll snap out of this. And you keep trying to
Mm.
exercise, which is like the worst thing to do.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I was able to go back to school. I couldn't work out anymore at all. I did school part time. And from then on, I could no longer do that job that I had in Algonquin Park. I could only do like reception work, like jobs where I was always sitting. And I'm now, since then, my disease over the past like 10 years has progressed. So, like, even thinking back on then, I'm like, oh my goodness, I could do so much. Um, but at that period of my life, I then I guess decided I really want to figure this out. There has to be an answer. Like you can't just get this sick and stay this
Mm.
sick. Like it
Yeah.
is. How is this possible? Like how? Like no. Like I refused to believe it, and I was the kind of person who like made a vision board and was like, "That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fix this." And like I obviously had a really long, like really steep learning curve, so I decided to go into naturopathic medicine, and it took 8 years, and I did it always part time. But I was like just near the end of completing my medical degree in naturopathic medicine, and I like in the very last semester, I caught a virus, and I was getting much, much worse, and I developed a lot more symptoms. And I was just pushing through because I was so close to the end. And unfortunately, I basically collapsed at the very end, and I had
Mm.
to like stop my studies. And that was 8 years ago.
Wow.
And I learned a lot of like different modalities and like acupuncture and botanical medicine and just lots of different modalities that I tried on myself. And some kind of improved my quality of life, but I was still extremely sick. And so I felt, yeah, very just disheartened. And I think a lot of people, when they can't get better, they feel like they've failed. And they feel, well, I'm just speaking for myself. I felt like I failed and I felt so much shame. And yeah, so then, sorry, this is a very long answer.
No, it's fine.
Um, I then felt a lot of anger, and also like I hadn't processed like a lot of the stuff that had happened to me because I was in
Mm.
such a state of denial. Like I was like, I am not going to accept this diagnosis. I am not
Mm.
this diagnosis. I'm going to like cure myself. And
Yeah.
and I didn't. And there is no cure for ME unless you're, as you know, like some people are really, really fortunate and they can have remissions, or some people
Mm.
miraculously do recover, but it's very rare. And so I was really angry and needed to process my feelings and everything that I had gone through. So I started making art about it. And I found that like in the past I've always made art. I'm a really creative person, and but the thing that changed was I started posting it online and
Mm.
sharing it with other people, and I found kind of meaning in that, and also realizing that I'm not alone. Like this is everything I've gone through is actually very common for people who live with ME, and it's happened to millions of us, and it's happening to millions of
Mm.
us more now with COVID and developing ME. And I just, yeah, that's kind of how that's sort of my journey up until now. And just I think that I've become a lot more better at talking about it with people, and kind of dismantling that shame and that blame that I was carrying for so long. So, anyway.
Mm. I think what's really interesting is that you use a lot of those themes around like shame and blame and grief as well. Like on our podcast, we started like a little mini series talking about grief in chronic illness, and I've spoken to quite a few people over the last couple of weeks in shorter interviews, and it was interesting because I was looking at some of your art yesterday online, and those sort of themes come through really strongly um, in terms of like actually the emotional side. Is that something that's like really important to you in terms of like tapping into to express yourself creatively? Is it sort of like a drive within you to kind of feel like you've got to express those things through your art to process it for yourself?
Hmm. Absolutely. I feel like um, I didn't have any space in my life for 10 years, like while I was going to school, to really feel the feelings I had. And I didn't have anyone to talk about it with. And yeah, definitely a lot of my art is about grief and the emotional side of things. Because yeah, I had to feel my feelings. So,
Mm,
and
yeah,
yeah.
and I find there's something really striking about your artwork, and that whenever I see it pop up online, and it's like, oh, you've done something new.
Mm,
It's always something that makes you stop and pause and really like consider the concept, and what always makes me wonder is like what process do you go through for yourself to kind of get to the from the point of like an initial concept of an idea to then it being a full blown kind of like really impressive project? Like, is that quite an exhausting process for you, or do you have to sort of like almost sort of tape yourself back and remind yourself to sort of take time over it, or do you get these big ideas and then just want to sort of flow with it?
Yes. So definitely the second one. I can even give you an example, actually. Um, Ahead of time, you gave me the questions that sort of what we were going to talk about. And one of the questions you were asked, I think that you asked was about my artistic mediums and kind of the process. Um, and sorry, no, it was a different question. You're asking about how did you adjust to life with ME? And
Mm,
immediately in my mind, an image came up of just, I think it's also because of the seasons. I'm also influenced by nature and the seasons. And
mm,
I just imagined like a tree just letting go of all of its leaves.
mm,
And so then I actually made a collage, like, because I didn't have the language for it. I just saw in my mind what it felt like. And so then I made a collage, and then I could really, I feel like then I can actually talk about it. It's a weird, I don't know if it's weird or that's just how my brain works, but for a lot of things that I feel, I'll see it, or there'll be something that's very tangible and physical that I'm like, it's like this, and um, then I'll just make it. And yeah, so I actually I wasn't sure if I was going to um, talk about it or not, but I this was that kind of the leaf collage that
wow.
came up, and I made that just because that's like how it kind of felt. I had to let go of who and everything I was before,
Mm,
and just the it's like a bare tree because it's just grief. There is just so much loss.
mm.
Um,
And I guess
so
each of those leaves kind of can represent a different part of your life in a sense, and that's yeah, it's quite a poignant expression. Yeah, yeah. How do you manage? You sort of come back to the point about sort
mm,
of getting that idea, and then it coming sort of coming from just a small kind of concept to something really big. Is that quite a draining process to manage for your ME, or do you just in terms of managing your energy levels, do you sort of like um, I'm losing my words now.
it's okay.
Yeah, is that quite an exhausting process, or do you have to kind of hold yourself back a little bit?
Oh, I definitely have to pace. And a lot of times, like, I'll have an idea and I'll try to put it out, and I'm like, oh, that looks terrible. Like, it is not working. And, or what actually happens is like, I find when I'm like crashing or I'm really sick and I don't have the capacity to create art at all.
Mm,
That's when I get so many ideas. And
mm,
so it's like, as soon as I come out of that, and I have more energy and like more space to create, I have to really hold myself back because I'm like, oh, I want to get that feeling out and I want to
yeah,
capture this exact feeling that I have. And so then I'll have this like creative purge, and then, I have to pace myself like when I do that, but it kind of ebbs and flows my
yeah,
creativity, but it's very bizarre. But I often get the most inspiration in the like most horrible times.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I just have to pace and wait till I feel better to like
Mm.
bring them into life, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I write songs. I'm not a great musician and I can't sing
Oh,
very
I've
well,
heard
but
your music. Ah, I
I
like it
do
a
I do
lot.
sort of like I do sort of like even just for myself, I find when I'm I think very similar to you, like when I'm in those crashy places, I might write some lyrics and then they just sit there for quite a while until maybe I have like a good 2 weeks and then I'll write a song around it or something like that. So it's the hardest thing to know that you've got something that you want to create, but then not be able to actually do the physical side of it to make it reality, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's hard.
yeah, I totally relate
And
to that.
what are some of your favorite pieces that you've done over the years? Because you've kind of built up quite a big portfolio of work around the chronic illness, and they all express different things. Have you got like favorite pieces, or are they all kind of quite special to you?
Um, I think I there's a few pieces that I really, really like because they kind of articulate exactly what I want without having to say anything. Like people just look at the images and they're like, ah, okay. And so I actually, I wrote, I would never be able to remember the titles, but
Yeah.
there was a book I made. It was like an anthology series, probably a couple years ago. And I used books of different sizes. It's actually a
Mm,
concept developed by, I think his name's Johan Deckman. He's an artist who uses books with their titles to kind of talk about uh, facets of life. And so I kind of used his concept, but applied it to ME and just what patients, it was before the pandemic. So just kind of the state of ME.
mm.
And should I describe it or is
Yeah,
that,
if you describe it, and then maybe we could put some pictures over the top for the video afterwards,
oh, okay.
if you'd like
Um,
to send us.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So so in one image I have a large book and it's called Dreams and Plans and it's a really thick book. And in comparison, there beside it is a tiny book that says Life with ME. And so you see the like dramatic contrast and there you're it's just heartbreaking. Um,
Mm,
and then the second one is a book that says how to best communicate your illness, and then a much smaller book, which its title says The People Who Will Believe You. And that, again, is heartbreaking because
mm,
of the history of, disbelief and neglect. Um, and then there's another picture with three books, and each book is getting smaller. And the first book says what is known about ME. The second says what I know about ME. And the third is what my doctor knows about ME.
yeah.
And it's just such a truth for anyone who has this disease because it's ME is not taught in medical schools, and you literally have to become your own doctor. And I tried to, I
Mm,
tried to, but anyways. And then so the fourth book is a giant book of that says symptoms, and then beside it's a blank table that says treatment options. So there's no treatment options for ME currently today, which
mm,
is horrible. And
mm,
then the last picture is there's like a tiny little leaflet that says research funding in the 1980s, and then a really same size tiny little leaflet that says research funding now. And it's just to illustrate basically the
mm.
progression and how we haven't really moved that much forward.
Yeah,
And
and I
so I
think
like, oh,
it's
go ahead.
striking. No, no, it's striking, and I remember that those ones in particular, and it was probably a few years ago now because it was kind of when I remember seeing it not too long after I first became ill again after a 20-year break of being ill with ME, and I was
Oh,
healthy,
wow.
and then it hit me again, and that that realization that things hadn't moved on in the 20 years since I'd been ill the first time, and that like you said, like the leaflet, and then another leaflet, and then a blank table, and it's like, yeah, it's heartbreaking that there's so little research and development and treatment out there, and you feel completely sort of like um, on your own, and I think that's something that really was really striking to me in terms of seeing those books, and yeah, it's heartbreaking. I think what you've tapped into something that's um, your concept around that, and so many pieces of your work, it hits you really hard in the emotions, really, in the sense of like it's striking, and I think it must be designed. I guess you wanting to raise awareness through it as well. Like, is that something that you, as part of the thought process, or is it about empathy for people with ME and for them to relate to?
Yeah, I think it's different for each piece, but that piece I really wanted to, I wanted anyone looking at this to be like, oh, wow, like it's
Mm,
bad. The situation is bad for people with ME and like it's not okay. And so I wanted it to be very, um, oh, I don't, I just realized I forgot to mention one of the books, but you can post that up there. But I just
yeah.
wanted it to, yeah, just be not sugarcoat things and just
No.
be like, this is the situation.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess other ones that come to mind that I, that for me, again, they're like really moving for me because it's just an experience that is just so painful. I used like mouse traps and
Mm,
I can't remember what I call. Oh, it was Freedom with a Catch, and it has like a butterfly flying, and then it's like I think caught in the next mouse trap or something like that.
mm,
And it's basically like when you have ME, you're never really free because any sort of window of freedom or joy that you have, there's PEM, which is post exertional malaise, and it's
mm,
unavoidable. So everything comes with a price. And
mm,
that's what that one was about. And I also like creating art that has a physicality to it. So
mm,
when people who don't have ME look at it, they can like, they feel it in a way.
mm,
So I made, there was one kind of sculpture that was a man, and I filled him with rocks. And I
mm,
wanted it so when you looked at it, you would be like, oh my gosh, that would feel impossible to like move.
mm.
And I can't remember what that was called. I think I wrote it down. Herculean effort. I think I said that right. Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the ones that the series that I just did, like someone who doesn't have ME, if they look at um, like bricks strapped to a boot, they're going to be like, oh, that's a really heavy boot. And you're like, yes, it is. It's,
Mm,
and it's like that they look at it and they can feel it. And
mm,
I think that's the kind of art that I'm drawn to make because I want
mm,
people with ME to be like, yes, that's what I feel too. And then people who don't have ME are like, oh my goodness, that's what you feel. And
mm,
that's your truth. And that's like, that's hard.
mm.
And so that's, yeah, those are, I think, my favorite pieces.
Yeah, the one that you've just put out recently, the invisible exertions, that it was it was really striking that it made me think around the times that I'm really exhausted, and I think one was just like a hairbrush, or did you have a toothbrush or something like that? And
Yeah,
it was just like actually sometimes just holding my mobile phone up in front of me, or I'm lying in bed, and actually my arm is just like literally aching, and
yeah,
and and that's how, and it was like, whoa, yeah, that's how it is. It feels like literally like trying to lift a brick. When some days I can do that fine, and other days it's just like you're so exhausted, and I think your work is so valuable in that sense that it puts into perspective actually when sometimes words are too hard to describe. You've got a visual representation there, and hopefully that can somehow try to explain to people a little bit better about what it's like to feel like to that experience. And yeah, it's really appreciated. um and then did you have other bits that you want to talk about? Because one of the ones that I really liked was, did you do one with Russian dolls as well?
oh yes, yes, I
And
did,
I
yeah.
love that one. The idea of like your world
Oh
becoming smaller through the, was that the idea behind it?
yeah, yeah. I really like working in metaphors and symbolism
Yeah.
too, because I find if I do it literal, like so literal that it's not exciting for me, like I like to create things that aren't obvious in some of my art. And so I liked using flowers because I love nature, and then making all the dolls darker and the garden smaller. And yeah, it was just to another physical way to show, like when you hold in your hand that tiny little rose and the tiny little Russian, like the tiny little doll, it's just like that's how it feels. And
Mm.
it's, yeah, that one was, yeah.
And then you also use quite a few sort of self portraits as well. Is that quite important to you in terms of like it? Because some of them feel like when you look at them, it feels like there's a lot of vulnerability there. And
Hmm.
is that something that you feel comfortable with in terms of like sharing something of yourself in terms of self portrait that's also quite vulnerable? And it's quite stark to look at in terms of some of the ones that you've done, like with paint on your face and things like that. That are quite visually stunning of yourself. And is that something that feels quite does it feel quite bold of you to put out there because it's quite a vulnerable representation of yourself?
Yeah. So, I'm a very introverted, like
Mm.
reclusive person. I don't like if someone told me 10 years ago I would be sharing my art, I like wouldn't believe you. Like I just, it's not really my thing. But to answer your question, I do feel like a vulnerability hangover the next day, usually when I
Right, you
share.
put it out
Like,
there and it's like, well.
I'm like, oh, that was too much. Like, I probably should have just kept that to myself. But I think it's important to, for me to share. Like, I'm thinking of just some of them. I think there's one in the grief flows, and I painted rivers like down my eyes, and like with this illness you cry so much, like there is
Mm.
so much grief in it, and it doesn't end. It's like always, there's always reminders, there's more, that you could potentially lose at any moment. And it's such a raw and such a intense experience that I don't think I couldn't make art that reflected that. And
Mm.
um I find that when for me, doing makeup art or doing sculpture or doing, like, I like to use different mediums, because some I think would be able to capture what I want to say a lot better. So for makeup art, I find certain concepts just worked better with using makeup art versus like if I wanted to make a collage, it wouldn't translate the same.
Mm.
So yeah, I do.
Mm.
There's definitely using myself. There's that added level for sure of vulnerability.
Mm. And because you use photography quite a bit, so you've got kind of like you makeup art, and then in the photography, and then almost like sculpture, and then you sort of like delving into lots of different things. And is some of your work sort of manipulated on a computer as well? Is that, do you use sort of graphics and things like that? Because there's all sorts of different sort of ways of working. So how do you kind
Hmm.
of, once you get a concept in your mind, how do you decide kind of how that's gonna sort of translate into a real life finished art project in terms of, oh, this would make a good sculpture, or this would be something that would work well on a computer generated sort of piece?
Yeah. So I guess I have to think about it kind of a lot, and then when I decide, for instance, if I want to make a collage about it, I'll make the collage. And I do, for all of my collages, I don't know how to use Photoshop, but I do use
Mm.
apps on my phone if I want to enhance the colors, or if I want to adjust the contrast, if I want to just kind of, those elements can help convey what I'm trying to say. Um, but yeah, sorry, what was your question again? My brain fog's starting to
Um,
kick in.
that's okay. We won't go on too long. I think it was around, yeah, like sort of from the concept to how you decide what medium to use for a different concept. Is it just thinking,
Oh,
oh, this would work well, or yeah.
yeah. It's just like from the onset, I kind of decide what I think would work. And yeah, it's just, I think sometimes there's like concepts I have that I'm like, oh, I feel like this would be best done by like someone illustrating it.
Mm.
And so there's some things that I can't really creatively make. But
Mm.
I think it's just through like experimenting with the different mediums, and then just just kind of going with one.
Hmm. Um, yeah, we'll sort of like try not to go too much longer. The one thing that I really appreciated that you wrote, because you sort of write on your website as well, and you wrote a little bit about I think societal perceptions around chronic illness and ME. And I'll just
Mm-hmm.
read out what you wrote, which I
Yeah,
thought was really good. And if you could sort of like talk to that a little bit.
for sure. Yeah.
You said there is another type of healing. It is the healing that takes place when your struggling is validated, seen, and heard. It's one that happens when we move closer to each other and truly listen. It's touching with love what has been touched with shame, stigma, fear, and overwhelming loss. This is the healing of the heart. I really appreciated that when I read it recently, because um, it almost places it's something that often with ME or chronic illness we carry a feeling of responsibility in ourselves for our illness, and I think um, we can talk about like ableism and uh, social models of disability, but I think what you wrote and just put in that little paragraph or sentence was really helpful in terms of seeing um, the world differently, or the world hopefully seeing ME and chronic illness differently, in the sense that um, it's not our fault, and actually it's almost like the world needs to see the chronic illness differently, in a different light, for us to be able to like access that world. Is that something around? Is that some? Have I kind of like summed up a little bit what your thinking was?
Yeah. I was also, for sure. And I think when I was writing that, I was thinking too, like how it's so traumatic to develop this disease, and how it's confounded by not being believed. And that's so, it's just like even worse. The
Mm,
disease is horrible. Not being believed is horrible. And it's created so much neglect and so much added trauma, when it's like, it's so basic just to have compassion and to listen, and why has that not happened? And like for us, it's so simple to do, and it's such a basic place to start with ME. Like if we have no treatments, we might not have treatments for a while. It's such an important place for the healing to start,
mm,
for doctors and society as a whole to treat people with ME with the compassion and the care that we deserve, because like you said, it's not our faults.
mm,
This happened to us, and it's not our responsibility to find a cure, to find answers. Like there aren't any for many of us, for most of us, um,
mm.
for actually any of us. And yeah, I just think it's a really important place to start the healing.
Mm, yeah. Um, well, I just want to thank you for coming on. And it's like when Dov, my co-host, now, when we started the podcast or talked about starting a podcast, and we got these ideas, and one of the we thought what can make our podcast unique, like what sort of angle do we want to have on the podcast, and we sort of we were thinking about this idea of creativity, and once we sort of tapped into that, and we've interviewed various different people that have written, or we've got plans to speak to different people that are creative with their chronic illness, and how that somehow for many of us like untaps something that we have to process and make sense of our illness through their creativity. And you were one of the first people you were on my list of people I want to speak to,
Oh,
because it was like I knew that you do that so well, and I think the ME community really appreciates your work, because, like I said earlier, it is something that is so relatable, and actually it can unlock a lot of things for us in terms of processing kind of our own grief and our own um, yeah illness journeys, really. So yeah, thank you for that.
oh, thank
One
you.
one thing that you're also involved in is a initiative called Bake for ME. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we finish?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, uh, an actress who was on the show Vikings, Jenny Jacks. She played one of the queens. I don't know if you ever watched Vikings.
Yeah, I
Um,
have, and I'm hoping to speak to Jenny. I've spoken to her people, so I'm hoping
oh,
to speak to Jenny
amazing.
at some point. Yes.
Well, she developed ME, I think around 2019, after an Epstein-Barr infection, and she's now become an ambassador for the OMF, and she founded the Bake for Emmy CFS bake off sort of challenge, and she runs it a few times here and there a year, and it's just kind of a fun way to raise awareness and to get other people outside the community involved in just talking about MECFS. And it's, yeah, this month is the Halloween Bake Off. And so I'm a guest judge.
Mm.
So by October 31st, if you have, or you know anyone in your life who likes to bake, they can bake a Halloween themed dessert and tag, I think it's at Bake for MECFS on Instagram, and you're entered into the competition. And it's, I think, every time you, or every person that enters, they just donate to various MECFS organization or charity. And yeah, it's just kind of a fun way to bring community together.
Mm. Yeah, it's good. So I think what I'll do is I'll put a link to that on. Hopefully, you can link to Instagram on a YouTube description. I'm not sure, but
Mhm.
I'll try and do that, and also I'll put links to your website. And I was also looking at the CME Expo that you were involved with as well. Did I get
Oh,
that
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that
And that
was. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead because I'll yeah, I'll try and put something up because that was a really there's some really lovely pieces in there.
Oh, thanks.
Was there anything else you want to say about that?
I think that was put together by Amanda Francie. She
Yeah.
also has Emmy, and she also has quite a. I think she did three of them with different artists with Emmy, just to showcase like their experiences. And yeah.
So we'll do that as well. So yeah, go and explore Christina's work. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure you will have seen bits and pieces of her work if you've kind of been in an ME online community for any length of time because they do get shared around, and it's brilliant that people get to see your work and to experience it and to reflect on it as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us today. It's been really good to talk.
Thanks so much
And
for
yeah, thank you
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, it's been a good chat.
very much, sir. Thank you.